I was a child, the stars saved my life. And what I mean by that was that during or after, really, after the violence of my father, or in response to the violence of my father, I would often go outside late at night and lie on the grass and look up at the stars. And I would feel myself floating up, and I would feel myself held by them. And there was a profound comfort in that relationship. And they would tell me that things were going to be okay. And they would tell me that what I was experiencing in my family was not inevitable, and it was not natural. And they would tell me that things didn't have to be this way. And that's what they gave to me. And what I gave to them, certainly not something they could use, but what I gave out was I gave them the feelings and emotions and thoughts and reflections and responses that were too sharp and too hard for my 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old mind and body and being to be able to hold. And they held them for me, and they couldn't use this language at the time, but they metabolized them for me, and they chewed them up, and then they gave them back to me in a form that I could metabolize. And it's not too much to say that without the stars, I would not have survived. I've since come to know, or since read, that this is a fairly common response to abuse. Not necessarily stars, but one of the things that so many people who are able to survive abuse, one of the reasons that they're able to survive it is because of they had some relationship somewhere, something that the perpetrator could not touch. There was some special relationship that stayed free from that taint and from that destructiveness. For some people, it may be their relationship with music. For some, it's a relationship with a certain pet. For some, it's a relationship with some place. And for me, it was a relationship with the stars. And I think there's that story. And then in addition, I think it's not just that the stars can cradle abused little boys, but that when we cut ourselves off from the natural world, we are cutting ourselves off from the ground, and we're cutting ourselves off from the source of all life and a great source of comfort. And people ask me sometimes if I meditate, and I always respond, why would I meditate? I live in a forest next to a pond. I don't know how people survive cities, and I don't know how people survive not having I want to say constancy, but it's not just constancy of the land. It's a constancy, and at the same time a changing. You know, where we are sitting, where I'm sitting right now. We'll see if this works. The right there is a pond, and those trees right there, when I moved here, those trees were not there yet. And this pond, there's a willow right there, and that was the only willow around the pond. And now you can't access the pond without, you have to push through undergrowth to get to the pond. So it's changed. And there is a change, but at the same time there's a change, there's a constancy. It is here. And I interviewed Vine Gloria decades ago, and he taught at the University of Colorado, and he talked about how his students would all try to do these things to become individuals and to become real characters. But becoming a real character involved doing the mall crawl in Boulder, or doing the Boulder run, or doing all these things, buying new clothes. When I was in college, I had a friend who had another friend, and I was talking to that friend one day, and she said, you know, my life is just so messed up. I need to make a change. I'm going to go get a haircut. And so we do all these things trying to get back to ground somehow. And Vine Deloria talked about how it's really hard to be a person, to be a full person, a fully developed character without a relationship to the land. And he said a lot of his students would go hiking, and then they would think, wow, I had this great relationship with the land out there. And he said, no, you had an aesthetic experience, and that's important, but it's not the same as the constancy of coming out and seeing these huckleberry plants, and the constancy of knowing that at this time of year there are mosquitoes, and the constancy of knowing that at a certain time of year the huckleberries bloom, at a certain time of year the salal blooms, the willows come first. And I'm going to jump again. There's a person I met not very long ago who talks about how the concept of community is changing in the current online era. And he said at one point communities were place-based, and now they're no longer place-based, but instead, as he said, aspirational-based, or they are identity-based. And he talked about how you can even have aspirational identities where people will form an online community of some computer game, and they will have a community of people where they don't actually know who each other are at all. You could be a 47-year-old male, or you could be a 14-year-old female, but instead you're in a community of elves. And when he was talking about that, I was just becoming increasingly horrified. And I was thinking about something that Jeanette Armstrong, the Okanagan Indian writer and activist, said to me one time. She said, you know, we Indians have just as many squabbles as white people do. But a big difference is that I know that because we live on this land, my great-grandchildren may marry your great-grandchildren. And so we have to figure out ways to get along. And how different is that? When you have, see, that's the thing, is community requires a commitment, and it requires some form of constancy, and it requires some form of, this is why Facebook friends are so fragile. There's no commitment, and there's no reason for there to be. What I'm trying to get at is that we all need reality, and we are given a pseudo-reality all the time, and we forget what's real. And what is real is that these plants are growing, and that's and they are here, and this is their home. I was very recently talking with a friend of mine about how she had moved into this area that was a beautiful meadow overlooking a mountain lake. And a whole bunch of other people moved there. And her experience was that most of the people who moved there wanted to kill every living being that they did not put in themselves. And likewise, in this neighborhood, I mean, you see this forest, and this forest does extend, and there are bears here. And I have been getting in fights with the neighbors because when they see a bear, they want to kill it. And I keep insisting that we have moved into their homes. And if you don't want to live with bears, you should not move into their homes. If you want to live where there aren't bears, then live in the city. But don't move into the country and then get mad at bears who lived here first. And there are other people in this neighborhood who move into this forest and they cut down all the trees and they put in a lawn. I don't understand that. And that is part of the attitude that is killing the planet. This belief that if that only what we create is important. And the forest reminds us that we aren't primary. And it also reminds us that, you know, I walk through this forest every single day. And when you walk through a forest, you are reminded of death because there is death all around you. There are dead leaves, there are dead trees, there are parts of this willow are alive and parts of this willow are dead. And I think that's one reason we hate wild nature, is because it reminds us that life requires death. And I don't really know how to tie all this together except to say that I know I'm not alone when I say this. I have had conversations, even very recently, with people who've said some very similar things, that I think the stars, like the ground, are our salvation because they are constant and they are real. And when we get lost in all of this human drama, or lost in the falseness of the pseudo-realities that substitute for reality, in the belief that the economic system is more important than the real world, or the belief that what happens online is more important than the real world, I think that this tree right here can ground us back, because it is something that's real. I don't know if you've ever had some sort of terrible traumatic experience, but I know for myself that when I have, and when I have been dissociating from that experience, it has been very important for me to maintain a sense of connection to my body. This is one reason that if someone is extremely traumatized, that someone else might say to them, breathe, breathe, don't forget to breathe, because you have to go back to what is real, and breathing is real, and you have to go back to touching ground. Anyway, I was going to say a moment ago that when the horrors of this culture overwhelm me, which they do quite often, I come back to this place and these trees and to what is real. And and their constancy. And I also go back to the stars, and I think about what Judith Herman said about how so many people are able to survive abuse because they have that relationship that can't be touched. And I know that as this culture is killing the planet, I mean, it's small solace and not sufficient, and we need to stop this culture. We need to do whatever means are necessary to stop this culture from killing all that's beautiful and wild and good. But at the same time, I derive some solace from the constancy of the stars and the knowledge that they cannot destroy them. And no matter what they destroy, they cannot reach that far.